How about telling us something about yourself that others don't know?
I keep dead songbirds in my freezer.
Hi, Terri Gillespie here, and welcome to Author, A to A with Terri. And I'm so excited about meeting this author. In fact, I've been excited for almost a year since I read her last book. This month's author is Cheryl Grey Bostrom, and I have been waiting for this newest release, and it is What the River Keeps. And you're going to find out more about that, and also in my blog interview with her as well. So she'll be with us in just a few seconds. But in the meantime, be sure to like, comment, and share this video. It really does help these authors that I interview and helps me too. And if you haven't subscribed already, be sure and subscribe. There's a great giveaway, and there are two winners this month. And I have to say a little bit more about Cheryl. One of the reasons why I love her so much is she is not intimidated by controversy or difficult subject matter. And her characters are perfectly imperfect and with behaviors that tend to make them a little off-putting, but there's a mystery behind those behaviors, and she digs into that. With this book, the mystery thread was so fantastic. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I hope you're excited as much as I am to meet Cheryl, and let's not wait. Here she is. Welcome, Cheryl.
So good to be here, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. As I said in my intro, I have been looking forward to this really since last year when I read your last book, Leaning on Air. That was so incredible. So
Oh,
incredible.
thank you.
You're so welcome. So, Cheryl, you are one busy lady. You're a naturalist, a photographer, a grandmother, a wife, an award winning author. Now, before we go too far, what exactly is a naturalist?
I'm really excited that you asked that because it's an important question. Because there is the whole concept of naturalism, which is the belief that everything arises from natural properties and that supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or
Mm,
dismissed. And I'm really quite the opposite. A naturalist to me means a lifelong student of natural history. And the natural history is the scientific study of animals and plants as observed rather than conducted through experiments, and as understood in popular rather than academic form. So, to summarize all that, what that just means is that I love the natural world. It speaks to me about the nature of our creator and how he
mhm.
expresses himself in the natural world. And I'm always studying the science, I'm always studying the biology, but as it applies to the dynamic, interactive natural world out there. And so you come to our place and we'll be outside and we'll be talking about we'll be talking about the birds and the trees and but at a deeper level, a more layered level. So does that make sense?
So
But it is
you're much more interactive. So
Mhm.
typically, when I envision a naturalist, I see somebody in khakis and sturdy boots and
That would be
and
me. Yeah, that would be me. I'm out
but
there
then
prowling around the ponds and the trees and just delighting, but it's worshipful for me.
yes,
It's fabulously holy.
yeah, I believe that. I know we were talking a little bit earlier, but I really miss Washington State. We were there for 2 years, and I am not an outdoorsy person, not an outdoorsy person. But we went white water rafting in where, well, I'll plug in where we went, but whale watching, inner tubing down Mount Rainier, which, believe it or not, it was too hot. So our tube kept getting stuck in the snow
Oh,
all the way down, which seems odd. So since I was very busy in that beautiful environment, I know you have got to be busy. So what's the best way for my viewers to keep in touch?
well, if they want to see more of the Pacific Northwest, they could go to my Substack, which is, it's called Birds in the Hand. But if you just go to substack.com and type in Cheryl Grey Bostrom, you'll see a lot of my nature photography and my musings about the
Mm.
natural world and just bookish things. And I do a lot of giveaways. And you can contact me and subscribe to monthly Saturday letters there. Or you can go to my website at cherylbostrom.com. And either way, you'll connect with me. And if you write to me, I'll always write back.
Oh, I love that. I really do. I do that too, but you know, it's rare. It's unfortunately it's kind of rare. Um, so all of those great links that Cheryl just talked about, they'll be down in the description section. So,
And I'm on socials. You can reach me on, particularly on Facebook and Instagram as well.
and we'll have those links down below as well. Now, I have to say, I've been waiting for this book, and I didn't even know what it was going to be about. I just knew that it was going to be good. And What the River Keeps is such a unique book. Your other book, Leaning on Air, was very unique as well. I love that you have perfectly imperfect characters and that you're not afraid to dig into behaviors that aren't quite acceptable in the general public. And you do it with such compassion and a real understanding. I mean, it just seems logical and possible the way that you dig into these characters.
Thanks, Terri. I taught family psychology for a number of years. I was an English teacher too, but I had a double major. And apart from the natural world, probably the other thing that I'm fascinated by is the human psyche and human relationships and how they interact with, with spiritual dimensions of life and just how our circumstances drive us to certain behaviors or certain misunderstandings. And because my characters take on their own lives, I know where I want them to land, but they will tell me what they're going to do. And so for me, it's an equally imaginative journey as it is for a reader because I'm just not sure what they're going to do. And
Mm-hmm.
and yet I always learn, and it's also very cathartic for me as I'm, there are always pieces of my own life, my very broken life in there, and of my own growth and healing. And while I'm not Hildy Nybo and I'm not any of my characters, they do carry pieces of who I am
Yeah.
and of people that I've loved and people who have marked me in some way. So.
Yes. Now, I love that, and I love the fact that your grandmother played such an important role in your life because my grandmother was my best friend growing
Oh,
up.
geez. Oh,
So
yeah. Well, my grandmother, my grandparents were um, among the five generations who um, homesteaded as members of a utopian colony in the Olympic Peninsula. They used to have those all over the West Coast, and they were people really searching for heaven on earth, and there were Christ
yeah,
followers among them. But they came west and settled in these communities, which happened to be this particular one is on the Olympic Peninsula where I grew up, and it's really ground zero for this book. I grew up roaming the Elwha Valley with my grandparents, and
Mm,
my granddad was born the year that that first dam was built on the Elwha River. And so I have a very tender spot for both this setting and the people who were affected by what happened to that river. And then, of course, the river's just this huge, we haven't talked about what the book's about yet, but it's a huge metaphor for what unfolds in the life of my protagonist, Hildy.
yeah, yeah, the river plays such an important role. And I had no idea that when we dammed these rivers, and on the surface it seemed like a great thing. You're creating power, you're more in control, but what we did is we destroyed the environment. And um and the weighing the pluses and minuses, the minuses were devastating. So
Absolutely. Mhm.
yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Well,
So
and now we have, the movement that is afoot is to take out all these dams, and it's a
mhm,
very complicated issue because,
mhm.
as you know, in Leaning on Air in Eastern Washington, we've got a much drier climate, and we have
Yes.
all of this ag land. And, there was on some of those dams, there was an insensitivity to the life of the river. And there, fish runs were really damaged there as well. And yet it brought life in so many other ways. And so it's so hard it's just a very challenging issue.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't claim to say that that I'm an expert in all of this dam removal stuff, but when it comes to the Elwha, that river is 45 miles long, and it runs 85% of it is in Olympic National Park. And
Mm.
when it was built without any fish ladders, no fish, no way for fish to get through this narrow, precipitous river that travels through these canyons, and fish runs that were 1 million fish a year, or 450,000 in an average year, but up to 1 million fish, and some of them 100 pounds, were cut off, so that by the time this story takes place, those numbers were down to fish counts of 3,000 milling at the base and slamming into the dam. And so to watch this river set free is such an illustration of what can happen in the life of a human being when generational strongholds are removed, when lies are uncovered and people begin to live in truth. And so as this story is progressing with the demolition of these dams and the dredging of this sediment, it's really talking about us, right? People
Yeah.
can relate a little bit or they can relate a lot, but when people heal, when they begin to live in truth and in freedom, magnificent things happen, and whole ecosystems of family and generations get changed, just like this river. So it's really fun.
That's beautiful. That is just beautiful. Well, I read the first paragraph of What the River Keeps, and but my viewers have said repeatedly they love hearing the authors read their own.
Okay. Well, let me take us in the story. This reclusive fisheries biologist believes that she is losing her mind. And so she buries herself in her academic and her scholarly work. She's a superstar biologist at the Fisheries Research Center in Seattle, and she's an adjunct professor at the University of Washington. But when her mother's health is failing, she's falling into dementia, and Hilda gets a job offer to come back to the Elwha to work this, at the time, the largest restoration in history as these dams come down. And so she returns to the Elwha, where she's haunted by memories that don't make any sense to her, that have led to tremendous confusion for her. And they're most powerful, or the absence of these memories, they're most powerful when she goes back to the Elwha. And so what I'd like to read is it's in chapter 5. but it gives you an idea. She has just returned. She's deciding whether or not she's going to move to the Elwha, and she's staying in a cabin at her family's fishing resort on the Elwha, where her mother is still living, but they're recognizing that her mother's going to need around the clock care. And this is the first night that she's back. So it's called Wreck. Midnight, Hildy awoke shivering, and her first thought was of Butterness, that's her canary. She cranked the heat higher, gripped the bedding, and scrolled tighter into the flannel sheets and comforter, and caught a whiff of cold lake air. Adrenaline juiced her as she tossed blankets, leapt from her bed, and burst from her room to Violet's empty one, and Violet is her mother. "Mom!" Shrill with fear, her cry spilled through the gaping front door, bounced cross lake, and returned as an echo, unanswered. She fumbled into boots, snagged her coat from the hook, and raced outside. "Mom! Violet!" Her shout clouded in the stillness, and she shuddered from this snap freeze, the eerie quiet after the storm's bluster and her rising panic. "Mother!" She hurried to the dock, but the boats were tied, the water flat, the reflected stars uninterrupted by oar or splash. Hildy's call again pierced the air, and she broke into a run. Her boots crunched gravel, her lungs heaved. Shrieking now, she was halfway to the store when lights flicked on in June's kitchen, then flooded the porch. Otis, tousled with sleep, appeared on the landing, buttoning, scuffing into boots, suspenders draped at his hips. "She's gone," Hildy gasped. June appeared behind him and tugged his jacket hood over his head. He stuffed arms into sleeves and thumped 3 wooden stairs toward Hildy. "You checked the dock?" "Yeah, not there." So then they're hunting for her mother, and I'm just going to skip a little bit here, and she's spotting her mother, her barefoot, demented mother, on this icy road on a dangerous curve on the highway, and I'll pick it up from there.
Okay.
Barefoot on the highway center line stood Violet, 30 feet from the Elwha River Bridge. Hildy screamed her mother's name. To her left, headlights angled downhill toward the highway's turn to the river, the road's icy glaze a sheen in their path. "Mom!" she screamed again and stumbled onto the slick pavement. She caught Violet's arm and jerked her mother toward her. The truck's high beams trapped them both in the instant before the driver swerved. The sharp downhill curve, the jerk of a wrist at the truck's steering wheel, a week of rain frozen fast in a quick turn of weather. A skid, its force centrifugal on a sickening, icy arc into the oncoming lane. Hildy clung to Violet in horror as the truck skated, then slammed broadside into a concrete abutment at the bridge.
Mm.
A split-second eternity. As if deciding, the rig, its bed heavy with a slide-in camper and a pair of canoes, paused, teetered on the bridge rail, then flipped toward the river below. And they hear the truck go down the hill, and Hildy grabs her mother and pulls her to the side of the road. They call 911, and then this. Hildy hurried to the bridge and peered over the riverbank for the steep route Otis had taken to the truck 25 feet below, now roof down in the water. A front tire spun, and its chrome spokes blinked at the ice disk moon. On the downstream side of the cab, the dark shape that was Otis stood knee-deep in the inky river, hammering the partially submerged passenger window. With a club? A rock? She couldn't tell. The river's current pummeled bridge pilings beyond outlines in the gloom. Vehicle, boulders, man. Had the truck landed mere feet to the north, the entire rig would have sunk in the hole where her dad caught that 20-inch bull trout.
Mm.
She focused on the truck's dark hulk until her eyes adjusted, then bent to tie her boots. Then she dropped her laces and stared. A black shimmer of motion was rising through the underside of the truck. Steam from the engine? Gas fumes? No. Too far behind the engine, this emission came through the floorboards of the upended cab. Rather than actually seeing it, Hildy perceived it as a heat wave or a mirage in summer air. It was vaguely conical, without definite edges, dimensional but transparent, a distortion in the darkness. As if alive, the sensation rose 3 feet above the truck and hovered for a few seconds before it lifted overhead and loitered, a chilling membrane against the black sky and icy stars. It seemed to scrape the air before it dropped and dissolved into the river. She'd seen this one before.
Mm.
So it's her perceiving, it's
Mm.
her perceiving the unseen world and the role the unseen world plays in this river is profound, and yet hope is and light are far more powerful than any of these dark images or these shadows. So
Yeah, I think it's important um, for believers to understand that yes, we know that God is good and God is more powerful, but there are also dark forces,
mhm,
and we have authority
mhm,
in Jesus, but to deny them is to take a rather simplistic view of of this world,
mhm.
because we have a spiritual world and we have the physical world. So
Exactly, exactly. And so dimensionally throughout this novel, you have an awareness of both the dark and the light in this story, and you have this girl who's trying to break free from what seem like insurmountable obstacles, and to forgive the unforgivable. And
mm,
readers who have experienced, readers who've lived any kind of life know that these are our realities, and yet greater is he who is in us than he who is in this world. And
yeah.
the power of our holy Lord to break strongholds is just fabulous. And so I don't make, it's not simple. I mean, what Hildy has to forgive in this story is,
Mm.
is is humanly impossible. And yet I love the ending of this book. I love where the story goes, and I hope that readers take great comfort and power given by God through what happens in this story.
Amen. I know the way that you fashioned this story, to treat it as a mystery,
Mhm.
and she had the mystery that was going on in her mind and her assumption that she was just going crazy, and seeing what she sees in the spiritual realm would kind of support that, um, but she learns that in reality it was something that God allowed her to see for a purpose. So
Right, exactly. And she meets this guy who's experienced his own great loss.
yeah.
And he comes out knowing that God is a tsunami God who raises the dead. But it gives him this tremendous patience for her because
Yes.
she's so skittish around guys, and she has been led to believe that she's not eligible for a good guy. And how many women out there have been led to believe that they have to settle? And so watching the interaction of this couple, it's a very moving love story, but I think it's one that many will be able to relate to. As unusual as Hildy is, what she's experiencing is common, to a lot of young women who think they aren't eligible, or that they can't find a love that is going to be deep and true and strong.
So I have to know, what are you working on next? You don't have to give any spoilers, but what are you working on next?
I had a couple of false starts. I started the story way too early because I want to do a dual timeline, and it is a dual timeline story. And it's set in the San Juan Islands, and
Ooh.
the Salish Sea and the San Juan Islands are right there at the entry point of Puget Sound.
Hmm.
And we used to boat there a lot when I was growing up, and so I've spent a lot of time on those islands. But it involves uh, at this point, and it's the story's still young, it can morph, but it's a girl whose family had a fox farm in Alaska. And fox farms were big in Alaska as the Hudson Bay Company started declining because they had trapped out all of these animals. And my novels are nature novels. I'm always engaging something that
Hmm.
people are not aware of in the natural world. And so her mother helps her exit this fox farm, get away from this fox farm with two foxes that are doomed for fur. And so she ends up catching this paddle wheeler south, and there's a love story involved. And they end up on this island in the San Juans. And there's another mystery and there's a piece of it that I really don't even want to mention, but
Okay.
it's pretty cool. And then paralleling that is a story of a grandmother and her, it's the great granddaughter of this woman, but she's an elderly grandmother now herself. So we go from 1889 to 2023. And she has a grandson who was struggling during COVID and really finds no purpose in life. And he ends up uh, hunting these foxes with his 90-some-year-old grandmother. And it's a pretty cool story. And they end up dovetailing, how my stories will link together as the story comes full circle. And that's where it is right now. It could always change, but that's where it is. And
Oh,
and I just told you more than I've probably told many people. So
oh,
yeah.
thank you. So do you have a estimated release date?
I don't because I want to get a little further along in the story. There's a piece of it that I don't want to pitch yet because I may release it. I may keep it for another story. So I write faster than I used to, and so once we get things really rolling here, then I'll pitch it, and then hopefully it won't be too long. But it's not going to be on the year like these last few stories have been. It's
So
an
just
important
have to
part.
wait.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm really intrigued by the story and what I've uncovered. And this is one thing that's so cool that the Lord always does is he'll introduce elements of the story that I had no idea were even in there.
Hmm.
For instance, in What the River Keeps, I discovered that one of the elders in this tribe that was decimated by the dams, the lower Elwha Clalams, that he was a Christ follower and he guided his people into a path of long perseverance, long patience, and long faith, and long forgiveness for what was done to their river, to
Hmm.
the extent that Congress instituted the Elwha Restoration Act that says this river could be restored. And nobody thought that was possible.
No.
I'm just convinced that it was their steadfast prayer, of this group of natives that brought it to that point because they reached consensus that the dams had to come down. And so it's just, discovery of things like that are just make this job just a holy experience.
Y- Yes, yes. And when those characters, when they have their own self-discovery, and it's just it's so difficult to explain that to somebody who doesn't write, that you it's like I know these characters, I know their heartache, and how many times have you cried over your characters, and it's because they're so real. It's
They
just
are.
mm,
They are.
it's
And
such
you're
an honor.
Oh, thank you, Terry. It's an honor for us who are in this world to, it's like we're scribes. We get to sit on the
Mm.
sidelines and have God unfold these stories that he has planned for. We don't know who. We don't know who's going to read these stories, but if they carry hope to them and they carry a visual image of a character that they've come to know and love, and they can come alongside them and say, she did this, she can do this, God did this for her, he'll do it for me. I mean, oh, is there anything better? It's just great.
Yeah, that's why I love your characters because they're so uniquely flawed, and it just opens a vista of opportunity for people who are struggling, who don't believe that God can take this complicated past and present and heal it. So,
Mhm. Mhm. This girl, Hildy, she lives with her canary. She lives by herself and she thinks she's never going to be able to love anybody or be in community. And what happens to her is breathtaking, I
mm,
think.
hmm yeah, we can't even share the
No,
scope of
no.
her trials because yeah, it's
Well, and Terri, you know how when there are stories that are dark that you just don't, you go, I can't read that. I just don't want to read it. But these are undergirded by a power that's so mighty that, and with me as readers guide through that place, God is holding readers in these stories as they experience the darkness of these characters. So yes, it's heartrending. Yes, it's heartbreaking what they go through, but they're held and they're carried. And those are the stories I like to read because
Mhm.
they're he works.
Well, and that's the thing that I love about inspirational fiction is Christian fiction is the fact that we can trust that author, that when we're carried into this difficult story,
Mhm.
that there's a place that it's going that's going to be okay,
Right.
and that they can feel safe, that even though it may seem a little scary and it may seem difficult, yeah, that we know that we're safe
Mhm.
and we can,
Exactly.
yeah.
And humanly by nature, I'm a runner. It's my every inclination in me is to run from pain, run to the next happy thing, and as God has grown me you know, with him, we are safe moving into that pain and then moving through it to the other side.
Mhm.
And these aren't easy stories. They aren't, I don't, one editor that I worked with, she says, you can't, you have to avoid the dodge, which would be to completely go, take the detour route and don't address this pain. But it's in addressing the pain and knowing that we come out intact and we come out whole and we come out even joyful and peaceful and safe that we grow in strength too. Our self-control grows, our perseverance grows, our resilience grows. And when we can experience it from the perspective of an unusual character that maybe doesn't, that we think is their story is going to be so different than ours, but it isn't. It's our story too. We emerge different from these books. That's my prayer, and that's what I've heard. So I'm saying this just because I've been told that that's how people experience them, but that is what I have hoped readers would experience as they read these stories.
Well, you sold me, so just saying.
Thanks, Terri.
You're so welcome. Now, for these video interviews, I do have the blog interviews, and we'll have there's some great questions that Cheryl answered, including some tips for writers. But for these video interviews, I like to ask more fun questions. And what I'm asking Cheryl is, how about telling us something about yourself that others don't know?
I've thought about that. You gave me a little heads up so that I could come up with something, but I, I keep dead songbirds in my freezer, and not just songbirds, but hawks and owls. And we live on the Pacific, underneath the Pacific Flyway, and so we have basically millions of birds flying, the the migration routes overhead. And I
Oh,
go on to a site called birdcast.info during the migration and say, oh, well, 300,000 birds crossed our house last night. And sometimes you can go out and you can hear their wings and and it tells it's a Doppler radar, and they'll tell how high they're flying, the species that are flying,
oh
and
my goodness.
it's just the coolest thing. But the whole act of migration, if there was nothing else to point to God in this whole earth, it would just the very act of birds knowing where to go and how to fly and being safe under the cover of darkness as they travel, and and then landing in our fields and in our trees, and we'll have these migrating groups come in. But because there is so much bird movement, birds get hit by cars, birds get killed on power lines, birds hit our
Mm.
windows. And I'll have to send you, Terri, I've got a picture of one grandson who's painting a barn owl that was struck by a car, and I came upon it soon after on an early morning walk. And this bird was frozen, and our grandson, watching his reaction to the magnificence of this owl, this barn owl
That
up close.
close.
Yeah. And we can study their feet and their talons and the feathered edge of that allows these owls to fly silently, and just talk about them, from a naturalist's perspective. Um, it hopefully creates wonder and awe in them, because it does in me when I pick those birds up and study them. But
Mhm.
yeah, my husband wants to make sure that they aren't diseased birds, that they've died by accident. And so I
Well, and
can't,
he's a veterinarian, isn't he?
yeah,
So he would
yeah,
know.
yeah. So I can't put them all in there, but yeah. So
Yeah.
that's not, I don't tell people that a lot because they think it's pretty weird.
Well, you're very fortunate because I just binge watched Bones.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah. So I have a real appreciation for the beauty that is the skeletal system in
Oh
our
yeah.
bodies. Yeah, yeah, and how much it can tell us. But I am very much a bird person. So, on that note, for this month's giveaway, I'm so excited because Tyndale is going to give away two softcover copies of What the River Keeps by Cheryl. And that means that there are two winners this month. So we want to thank Natalie at Tyndale. So, my viewers, how many of you would like to be one of those winners? And it's really simple. All you have to do is like, comment, and share, and subscribe if you aren't subscribed already, both to the video, the YouTube video, and also to the blog interview. Um, Now, I do ask that if you could put your social media address on there so that I can get in touch with you without having to use an email address, because you don't want to put your email address in a public place like that. Now, the drawing will be held Friday, August 15th. And if you're already a subscriber, as long as you like and comment and share, you will receive those extra entries. Also, please note only the contiguous US entries has to be the contiguous US. So sorry, Alaska and Hawaii. So, Cheryl, do you have any final words?
Well, I would just love to encourage readers who are curious about the natural world or who love the natural world just to dive into my books and then spend time outdoors and hear what the creation is saying to you about your life, about your struggles, about your joys, because it's God's first book, this book of nature, and it
Mm,
dovetails beautifully with the Word of God. And I hope that in doing that, you come away blessed and richer and more at peace and more joyful. And write to me, tell me what you did. I'd love to hear.
I agree. I agree. So, thanks for watching the 55th episode of my interviews. And just a reminder that I have all those great links down below in the description section. And as always, Cheryl, and I do appreciate those likes and those shares and those subscribes and follows. And Cheryl has promised us that she will respond when you write to
I
her.
will.
So next month, the A2A featured author is the adventurous, best-selling suspense author, DiAnn Mills. And last year, my interview with DiAnn was a hoot. It was a hoot. So I'm expecting it'll be more of the same at this next one. Cheryl, thanks for being such a great guest. I knew it was going to be special, but this was very special to me.
Well, I've been counting the days. I so glad that we got to talk. Thanks,
Oh,
Terri.
thanks. And I can't wait for your next book. So I'm going to be praying that the Lord will just open up that plot and show you all those little beautiful morsels that he has for us readers.
Thank you.
So viewers, thanks again for watching. Look forward to seeing you next month. In the meantime, God bless. And Cheryl and I are saying, keep
Keep reading.
reading.